Guys, the time finally came. This past Saturday, KSI finally announced who his next opponent would be on the Misfits Series 3 card right before the main event. After the co-main event had taken place, he revealed to the world who he would be fighting next, and it has been revealed to be Dillon Danis. Who saw this coming? I wonder. All that press before the fight, all those stare offs or those stare downs. When Danis came to the press conference out of nowhere and just started causing problems with KSI, when he flicked his hat off and threw his coffee at him and everything, that I can't show on video because I'll probably get like a strike or something, like a community guidelines thing. But obviously you could look up the video yourself. It's all over Twitter. It's all over YouTube. It's all over Instagram as well. But fact of the matter is, KSI is fighting Dillon Danis, and Tyron Woodley has sadly been left out. Tyron Woodley, as you know, had been calling for that fight the entirety of not last week, the week before that. During the Deji Mayweather fight, Woodley had been up in KSI's face asking for the fight. He's been talking on Twitter this entire time to try to get that fight happened. And I was gonna make a video of the possibilities of who KSI's next opponent would be. I forgot, but it was between, I think it was 3 or 4 people. It was Dillon Danis, of course. It was Tyron Woodley, and it was Joe Fournier. Those are like the top 3 guys. And then obviously in the days leading up to the fight, it came out that Woodley hadn't gotten a contract, or that Woodley did get a contract and that something happened that it's not happening. That he didn't get a follow-up or something like that. And then it came out like just a day or 2 days before, Joe Fournier, that the fight wasn't actually like going to go through. And then obviously that only left Dillon Danis to be the last one in line. And obviously he got that spot. Misfits X the Zone Series 4. It's going to be a pay-per-view just like the first KSI fight. These last 2 Misfits cards have been completely free if you have the DAZN subscription, but this time it's going to be an extra pay-per-view. It's January 14th in the Wembley Stadium, or no, OVO Arena in Wembley. And I mean, this poster looks so cool. I like the bandana and the leopard print. Obviously it's got JJ's bandana print, and the leopard print is supposed to represent Dillon Danis's fight shorts that he wore when he competed in Bellator. He would wear the leopard print shorts, I'm pretty sure. And it's gonna be exciting. This is Dillon Danis's first fight since 2019, which is, I mean, it's a bit concerning. I can't lie, but it is what it is. Obviously, this person pointed out. So he won't fight Tyron Woodley because he hasn't won a fight since 2018. Yet he fights Dillon Danis, who hasn't won a fight since 2019. Now, let me go through something really quick. Okay, I was going to make another video about this, but I'll just talk about it now. Jake Paul. Decent fighter. Not the craziest opponents. Obviously, Anderson Silva is a really good opponent, but not the craziest in his past few fights. But obviously, as a guy in his first 6 fights, you're not going to fight the top level guys. So, I mean, it is what it is. It's better than most professional boxers' first few fights. So, I mean, it's okay. If we look at the Woodley fights, the 2 Woodley fights, and the Ben Askren fight, people talk about, KSI's fighting a guy who wasn't won since 2019. Okay, well, we look at someone like Tyron Woodley, who hadn't won a fight since 2018, obviously. And we look at a guy like Ben Askren, who also hadn't won a fight since 2019. And obviously, it was a controversial fight anyways. So, controversial decision by the ref to stop the fight. Herb Dean, good referee, but made a questionable stoppage, as Robbie Lawler was not out. So, even though this fight does count, if we discredit this fight, look, 2017. It's even further back. So you look at those 2, and then you look at Dillon Danis, who's 2-0. We look at these fights. These were just grappling fights. I think they were like amateur shits. He went against Jake Shields, which is pretty cool. But we look at these two fights here. Professionally, Dillon Danis is undefeated. Tyron Woodley went on how big of a losing streak in the UFC? 4 fights. In total, 6 fights losing streak. Ben Askren went on a 3-fight losing streak, or 2-fight losing streak in MMA with got a quickest knockout in the UFC history. Then he lost to Damian Maia, and then he lost to Jake Paul, of course. So realistically, it's having Dillon Danis fight KSI. It's not as bad. Not that it's not as bad. It's not that bad if you look at, all of this and some of this. So even though KSI is not fighting like the greatest fighter of all time, he's not fighting the worst fighter either. And that's not to say that Tyron Woodley and Ben Askren were the worst fighters. But you look at someone like Nate Robinson. He fought him for his 3rd fight, and this guy had never fought in his life. Having KSI fight Dillon Danis is not the worst thing in the world. Realistically, it could have been worse. It could have been like another Swarms. Because KSI is also guilty of these things, fighting people that have never fought before, like Swarms. But just saying, when KSI fought Nate Robinson as his 3rd fight, or when Jake Paul was fighting Nate Robinson as his 3rd fight, KSI was fighting Logan Paul in the rematch for his 3rd fight. And if we look at Logan Paul, he's injured. Everybody was expecting him to be on this Misfit Series 4 card. Obviously, it was the hype behind it was always going to be like KSI and Logan Paul fighting other opponents. They were going to share the card together, and it was going to be huge. Like rivals to like business partners and all that. But obviously Logan Paul had that WWE match with Roman Reigns, which he lost, and then he had a torn meniscus and MCL. Apparently the ACL thing was disputed. He doesn't have a torn ACL, but he has a torn meniscus and MCL still, which is pretty severe. That takes a while to recover, and it affects someone's... you've seen it in UFC fighters before. It affects their fighting career tremendously. They have to sit out, and then they're not exactly 100% after these injuries either. So I wish a speedy recovery to Logan Paul, and it looks like he won't be on this card. So who will be on this card? Wait, actually, I want to backtrack a little bit, because Logan Paul originally was gonna fight Dillon Danis. It was confirmed by Dillon Danis by leaked texts, and it showed that Logan Paul and Dillon Danis were actually in talks to fight. They were going to fight, and then Logan Paul pulled out because of his injury, and now KSI is all of a sudden the press, and now he's fighting Dillon Danis. Now, what happened there? We don't know, but it was obviously during that week or that little time space where it came out that, Joe Fournier and Tyron Woodley are not getting the fight. Which means something switched in the middle of Logan Paul getting injured and in the middle of KSI and Dillon Danis' first face-off. Something happened in the middle of that where KSI switched opponents to fight Dillon Danis. Now, why? I don't know. Or I do know, actually. It's because Dillon Danis is going to bring eyeballs. He's going to bring hype, and he's going to bring that sort of level. Because, let's face it, Joe Fournier was not going to bring that much hype at all. Same way that Luis Pineda didn't bring much hype either. Tyron Woodley, it's not going to be hyped up because Tyron Woodley is 0-2 against Jake Paul. Look, one of them was split decision, and one of it was a bad knockout. I think it was this one boxing, I think it was ESPN or it was Matchroom. They gave Jake Paul's knockout of Tyron Woodley like knockout of the year, which is crazy. So how are you going to fight Tyron Woodley after that? You really can't, because there's not going to be the eyeballs, especially if Logan Paul is now off the card, so the hype is smaller. So the only logical way to go is fighting Dillon Danis for that hype, because this is pay-per-view, right? It's pay-per-view. You're gonna need people to want to watch it because they're gonna pay extra if they want to see it. So you got to make them want to see it in order to get those pay-per-view points. That's my theory. But since Logan Paul is not on this card, who is on this card? We don't know for sure. Obviously, there's people giving their guesses like my dream Misfits 4 card. You see a lot of these crazy fights. You'll see 10 to 12 to how many is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Like fights on one card. It's like, first off, you can't be putting all of these fights on one card. A lot of people are going to be asking why. Because Misfits was planning on having an event in February and an event in March. So if you're going to go January, February, March and have a pay-per-view at the start, if you're going to put like 22 fighters on one card, all of your biggest guys and all the biggest fights, then who's going to fight in February? You have to take some of these fights off in order to have some leverage and some hype as well for the fifth one, don't you think? I mean, that's what I think. But this will make somewhat a bit of sense. It's got 7 fights, the average amount of fights on a Misfits card. And a lot of people saying their dream fights. A lot of fights you'll see is Slim versus Gib. You'll see that one everywhere. On all these cards, you'll see Gib versus Slim. I think Gib versus Slim should be a headliner. I think it should headline its own event, February or March. I think February works better. Because Gib and Slim, guys, is this just me? This can't be just me. They don't deserve a co-main event spot next to KSI and Dillon Danis. That's just not how it should be. I think they should get their own headliner. Because this fight had been a fight that has been talked about for years. And now these two, Slim's undefeated in his entire career. And Gib is on a 2-fight win streak. He just came off one of the biggest wins of his life recently. So, guys, the only fight to make is Gib versus Slim in February. Or on Misfits 5. Not Misfits 4. Just trust me on it, guys. Believe me. Just take my word for it. You want this to be a main event. You want it to be a main event. Because there will be more hype for it when there is a main event. And it's the spot it deserves and it's the spot it needs. Alright. Jay Swingler versus King Kenny. That's one you'll see sometimes. Or you'll see Kenny versus Temper 2. You'll see Deji versus Wasabi 2, which I agree with. I think Alex Wasabi should come back to fight either Temper or Deji for the rematch. Those are the only fights that make sense, really. Jarvis and DDG is a good one. Willie Sharks Dean the Great rematch. We're going to get into that. Gideon Swarms is a good one. Charlie's Ice Poseidon is good. Buckingham versus Sneeko is such an incredible fight. Not an incredible fight, it's incredible buildup. I'm going to just be honest. The fight is not going to be too much. I just want to see Buckingham and Sneeko go after each other. I think that'll make some crazy hype. But if we scroll a little bit more down here, this was the video I talked about in my card review of Misfits 3. Look, this is Waleed Sharks begging KSI for the Dean the Great rematch in January. KSI told him, bro, I'll give it to you. I promise you I'll give it to you. You know, Waleed Sharks asked for the rematch in January. KSI is going to want to give it to him. Obviously, Dean the Great doesn't want it. I mean, I don't have to explain why. It's because Waleed Sharks is a really damn good opponent. And I think right now, Waleed is the only person who can defeat Dean the Great at that weight class right now. It's not Evil Hero. It's not Jarvis or DDG. It's not fucking NNA Productions. Waleed Sharks is the only one realistically that poses any sort of threat to Dean the Great. And he is a big threat. Dean the Great and Waleed Sharks have this line drawn in that division, okay? They have this line drawn. It is Dean the Great, Waleed Sharks, line drawn, bunch of space, everybody else in that weight class. Because there's nobody that comes close to these two. And since that first fight was so close, they need that rematch for Misfits Series 4. And it's hard to disagree. I mean, honestly, it is really hard to disagree with me on that. I don't know how anybody can disagree with me on that. I don't know how Dean the Great is gonna avoid this fight, but he cannot. He can't avoid this fight because now Waleed Sharks has an even bigger following, and they all want him. They all want that rematch. This is just one example, but everybody online wants that rematch. They want to see it. They want Waleed Sharks to get another chance. They don't think that Dean the Great really deserved that win. A lot of people don't think he deserved that win. That's the narrative right now. And if Dean the Great really wants to prove himself to the world, he gonna have to erase that narrative. That's why the rematch is the next one to make. KSI vs. Dillon Danis main event. Dean the Great will lead to co-main. But hey, that's just what I think. If we go back to KSI Danis, KSI is the ICB World Champion for Cruiserweight. He's also he's a World Champion and then the Misfits World Champion. He's got 2 belts on him. If we go to his thing, my bad. These are his last 5 fights. Obviously, he hasn't had too much great opposition in his last 2. Dillon Danis is going to need to step it up. Dillon Danis is in his last 2 fights, 2018, 2019. He's coming back this time. Let's hope he's sharper than ever so that he can show himself against KSI. But his 2 wins are not against the greatest opponents. 2-5, Kyle Walker, the stun gun, and 3-3, Max Humphrey. And he was both of these guys' last fights, and they were also on losing streaks as well. So, again, not the greatest resume. Dillon Danis, I mean, you could also say he's 2-1 after the what was it, the bodyguard or the security guard that choked him out. So, yeah, I mean, KSI not really going after the undefeateds, I guess. But, you know, it is what it is. This is the most hyped up matchup for KSI right now. Obviously, you want to sell that pay-per-view, that the zone pay-per-view, so you got to get Dillon Danis. But let's hope that they put on a good fight, KSI and Danis. Let's hope that Waleed Sharks and Dean the Great rematch gets made, and let's hope it's even better than the first fight. Those are my only 2 fights that I know are going to happen on Misfits 4. Every other fight is just speculation. I might make my own video on who I speculate could be on that card and who I want to be on that card. But this is just a video talking about KSI and Dillon Danis, how the fight's been made, and possible future fights, and how Logan Paul won't be on that card. And I'm excited. There's going to be no event in December, which is sad, but let's hope that a huge pay-per-view in January makes up for it.